Hello, welcome to Cosby Studio. Thanks for joining me here. I wanted to do a little video talking about the tools of the trade. So paint, palette, brushes, all the accoutrements that we use, all the way to varnish when you're ready to send a painting out the door. I'm not going to get into framing and all that. That's another subject. I'm talking about the painting process. And you're about to watch or have already watched a tutorial that I put out, and I'm sure you've seen other tutorials from other painters. And one of the questions that seems to come up a lot with my students is tools. So the brushes, the paint, all that. I thought I'd make this video to concisely talk about that. So let's get going. As far as laying out my palette, I always work the same. I never change the palette. Over years it's evolved, but in general I have a yellow-green. I buy this from Utrecht. It's the only one that makes exactly that color. It's a convenience color, but I can gray it down with a red. I can change it quite a bit with oranges, anything else, and warm it up with this yellow or that yellow. I can cool it down. So basically I work from the lighter side of the palette to the darker side of the palette, left to right. So I've got yellow green, I've got cad yellow lemon, cad yellow medium, cad orange, cad red. Of course by cad I mean cadmium. I've got alizarin crimson. I like the permanent alizarin crimson because it does fade if you don't get the permanent. Ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, viridian. I use Utrecht's Viridian, several brands, Gamblin, several brands do it as well as they do. Some don't. Some make a much cooler, much denser. This is semi-transparent, so I like that, semi-transparency. Then I've got raw sienna and ivory black. Now, these little pools up front here are my tinting colors. And the way I use those is basically I'm looking to have an easy modulation pile, so I don't have to go into my white all the time and mess it up. So if I want it to have a warmer, I use my standard that I use is cadmium lemon yellow in this pool, and I tend to mix it up about that dense. I don't want it to look white. I want it to look yellow because I'm really trying to tint something over to that yellow side. This is cad medium red, and this is ultramarine blue that I mix up. So I won't mix it up because that's just taking up more of your time, but that's the idea. And I'd like to keep it in a pool. That way I can easily dip my brush into a warmer color, a medium, you know, like, or take it more towards the red side, or I can take it more towards a cool side with the blue. In the mixing exercises, I show you a lot about that. But that's how I organize my palette. It's worked well for me for years. I think it'll work for you too. So I want to talk to you a little bit about brushes. Brushes are mark makers. They make any kind of mark with any kind of brush. Some of them are easier to use to make a certain type of mark, and some of them are a little bit harder. Some hold a lot of paint, some don't. Also falling in this category of a brush is a palette knife, because you can put a lot of paint on with a palette knife. You can take paint off, or you can smear paint. So this is technically a brush. But my standard brush kit, I carry in my little roll-up device here, is what I carry in the field. Now, when I'm in the studio, I've got a brush holder that I can stick everything in, and it's a little bit more, I guess you'd say I have a little bit more variety to my brushes. In other words, if I lose one, if it gets fuzzy on the end and I don't want it to be, I can always kind of just pick up another brush. But in the field, I carry extras. So I have from small to large here, and basically I've got my smallest brushes are my riggers. And a rigger looks a lot like that. This one's a little bit frayed out, but once you get paint on it, it's very easy to make a line with it, make a dot with it. That's the use I give it. My next is a small round. And there's various sizes in these. This one happens to be a number 6. There's different brands. I spend a lot of my time with Utrecht brushes because they have some pretty good brushes. Rosemary brushes are a favorite of mine. There's several companies that make brushes I enjoy, so I'm not so oriented towards the product, I'm oriented towards the shape of the brush. And this gives me a little control when I want to work in smaller areas, or when I want to influence linear stuff, make it happen. This is kind of my next jump. It's a small flat, and this happens to be a number 6, but basically, this is a Jack Richardson. It's synthetic. Synthetics and hog bristles do different things. Synthetics are a little softer. You can put the paint on really quick with them. I use that both in my large brushes and my small and my medium. So all the way through the spectrum, I like both. I'll talk about why when I get to the hog's hair. This is a brush I use a lot, this size, like in this range. These are a number 3. There's a newer one and an older one, so they get worn down like this. This is a brand new one. And what I'm dealing with here is I can lay a lot of paint in. It'll hold a lot of paint. I can pull paint back off with it. It's got a lot of versatility to it. The hog's hair it really holds up to scrubbing, whereas the nylon brushes don't, or the synthetic brushes don't. This is a long filbert that I use a lot of. So it's kind of in the same family. I can make a more expressive stroke with this brush, so I like it for that. I have a lot of control with that brush. This one's more of a chunker. I can put things on and paint in the negative around things with this very easily. I use that brush extensively, actually. Sometimes I'll do a whole painting. If it's anything under a 20 by 24, I have been known to go all the way through the painting with that size brush. This is just a larger version of that small Richardson, this one. So this is number 8. But I carry it because sometimes I just feel the need to have a little broader synthetic brush to work with. This is jumping up one more. This is a rosemary, and this is the hog's hair, or a nice natural bristle. And I can scrub a lot with this type of thing. Here's the newer version. This actually is in a Robert Simmons brush, which I really enjoy too. So I have a variety of these brushes, a lot because sometimes they're on sale, sometimes I can pick up a bunch of them for less price, so I grab them. But also I only buy the ones that work well for me. There are brands that just fall apart right away. Rosemary is not one of them, but as you can see, this brush, this is a filbert, but it's starting to get a little bit frayed around the edges, and that's because I scrub in my paintings a lot with it. So what this brush becomes when I put paint on is I can chisel it out better. But when I'm doing foliage or something, I can get in there and really dapple things in if I want to with this filleted end. And then I jump up into my broad brush synthetics, and I use these for laying in big swaths of paint. Like I say, I want to put in a big blue sky or a big dark shadow or a light area that has a value that I want to keep consistent all the way through the block end. I use these brushes mostly for that. When I go back in and start colorizing, they're also useful on large areas. And then sometimes I find a use for that you can really chisel out the heads, and I'll make straight lines with them or put in ridge tops by tapping them with full of paint into things. Also, It's really handy for making trees because I can go sideways with the trees and then cut back along the edge with another brush to paint in the negative around the tree, but then I get a sideways stroke on the tree. So that gives you a little bit of a clue what my brush kit's like. Brand is not really important to me. I just want quality. And over the years, those are the brands that have worked well for me. And this particular palette knife, I have 2 of these. And unfortunately, they're not making this teardrop shape anymore. But I like a good spring steel. I've had this forever. I won't let anyone borrow it because they're easily ruined. And I have one for my outdoor kit and I have one for my studio. And I'm very used to working my paint with this. I mix my colors with it. I really pay attention to what I'm using as far as a tool on my palette so that it's consistent. I don't want those little plastic palette knives they're not useful because lots of times I'm going in dragging paint on the painting as well as cleaning up my palette. So this is a good tool for both. I find that size very handy. And then last but not least, on my palette, I use a scraper because it's glass. Big industrial scraper. I can clean up really fast. After I wipe the paint off, I can get hard paint back off, like in an area that needs a little extra attention. And these things are cheap and they're ready to go. On my palette, or my desk here, this is a little workbench that I've turned into a palette. I keep in a drawer some pliers so I can get paint tube tops off. And to get the last out of the paint tube, I use a squeezer. So that should give you a pretty good idea of my palette and my tools that I use with it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about continuing a painting that you brought back in from the field or that you've been working in your studio and it's starting to dry. Now, even after a day, the thinner paint is starting to dry. So you have to spray or brush with Retouch varnish. The spray is become a little bit hard to find in California because it's outlawed everywhere. I use this Winsor Newton. It works really well. But it's got to be Retouch varnish, not finish varnish. The reason being is that when you spray the painting, you're trying to bring the colors that are drying back to their true value and their true hue. So like, for instance, dark colors will get lighter as they dry. Light colors will get a little bit darker as they dry. And if you match that while you're painting, say you've got a big broad sky and you're trying to go back in and work that sky a little bit. Well, you can match it perfectly. If you haven't retouched varnished it first, you're matching it to a dry color with a wet color. And that doesn't work. Once they're all dry, they'll be splotchy. So, and that happens through all the color ranges. The reason for the difference between spray and brush is with brushing, you have to have it dry enough, obviously, to where you don't drag the color around. So if you're working the next day or a few days after you're painting, or it's still wet in the big chunky whites or something, you've got to use the spray to get it activated again so that you can start painting. If it's dried enough, or if you're sending it out quickly to a show or to a client, or to be shown in any way, I use the brush varnish because it puts on a more intense varnish. It still dissipates after about 4, 5, 6 months because it has alcohol in it. It has a drying agent similar to alcohol, and it evaporates, so the varnish actually goes away. But you can't put finish varnish on until about 2 to 3 to 4 to 6 months, depending on how thick your painting is. So by putting a good brushed retouch varnish on it, you can show it in a gallery. And then I put a disclaimer note with every painting saying, after 6 months, have a professional like a frame shop varnish this, take it out of the frame and varnish this painting because it needs a final finish varnish. Just the realities of today is sometimes you don't have the painting until it's ready to be varnished finally. It's a great luxury to have a painting for 6 months if you're actually trying to get paintings out to shows. You don't have that much time. So anyway, that should clear up the finish varnish versus retouch varnish. Retouch varnish is important before you work on the painting. Second, third, fourth times that you go in on the painting, you need to hit it first with some retouch varnish.